conversations we've had, which I, of course, keep telling people, the ones that we had in the World Mediators Conference, Master Mediators at Work, that was really nice. Then, of course, that in conversation with the beautiful mind. So there's lots there with Laila. But Laila, the
Always
plan
a pleasure, Vikram. Thank you very much.
But Laila, the plan is that, of course, you will tell us about yourself. Then I will talk about the symposium, just a basic something, and then we'll go into the topic. So what do you think? Is that all right?
Amazing topic. You covered the whole world.
but
The entire spectrum of it. So one doesn't even know where to begin, Vikram.
So let me start. Let me start first with putting it out what the questions were. This is how the whole idea behind this symposium. Let me just put it up. Oh, we have, okay. So this is what we're doing. Mediation legislation, the how, what, when, where, which, who, why of it. And any other questions that Laila wants to answer, we're okay with that. And of course, we have now 50 plus speakers from 30 plus countries. I don't know now, earlier I thought that maybe I'll extend it and let's get more countries into it. But I think at some point of time, I need to say, okay, I mean, I have to end a symposium at some point of time. So let's see. But let us a little bit about yourself, and then I'll just talk about where to find information about the work I'm doing. Yes, please, Laila.
Well, to begin, thank you, Vikram. It's amazing how you've got so many people to talk and from different parts of the world. So you're really creating, a movement. So congratulations on that. And to talk about myself, well, I was a lawyer for almost 30 years, a mediator since the last 16 years, and a full-time mediator since 2015. I am very passionate about this topic because I really believe this is the future. It's mediation is something which is so different to what I've been trained in as a lawyer, the way I practiced dispute resolution. This is so different and I'm so excited by it. So if you really were to ask me, what is your passion today, I'll say mediation, collaboration, peace. These are kind of things that I'm really passionate about. So thank you, Vikram.
But that means there was at some point of time a shift in the mindset, or I feel that there's always a seed there which grew. That tree grew as you went along. I would look at it that way. So, but there are lots of other factors which, of course, we've discussed. But this is where people find information. I want to put this out, Laila, only because of the fact that I really, over time, want people to have some place that they can go find information rather than social media posts. Because that, for me, I mean, how many people actually get to see those? So this is another new series I've started because Ken Cloak, there's a book of his coming out with this title, Magic in Mediation. So we are going to have these sessions where everyone will talk about it. So I'll fix up a time with you for your session on it. I mean, up till now, only Ken and Mr. Panchu's sessions are done, but we'll keep having these. I mean, it's an interesting topic. So of course, here you can find information about, of course, the World Mediation Circle, where a lot of work needs to be done now, and what all is coming up kind of comes here. There's a newsletter, LinkedIn newsletter. You can click here and find the information. Otherwise, what's happened in the last years, and of course with Ken Cloak and all. There's a little bit on the YouTube channel and some lectures I started. This is another thing I'm going to do, the skill development program, where again I'll get you involved in that. You need to be involved with. My idea is to put out these programs for people who otherwise might not have access to these things. And of course, there's sections on mediation and Singapore Convention. That's about it, Laila. All yours, mediation legislation.
So how do you plan to go about this?
Totally yours. It's yours. Yeah, I think you can take us through.
You want to ask me questions?
I would think that, I mean, a little background, because look, you have some background on the legislation itself. Of course, your thought process on what we have, then where we were going, And I keep saying, luckily, we did not go there. The X bill, as I call it, all those things you can talk about. But then the global perspective, that how do you look at, in general, on a global level, first of all, how mediation should be looked at, where the Singapore Convention comes in, the model law that's been put out, and even domestic legislation, what should it look like? I mean, because here we're looking at from the perspective of a practitioner. The judges and the lawyers and maybe the legislators maybe do understand, don't understand how it should be legislated. But your thought on how it should be looked at?
Okay. Since you started off by asking all those questions, maybe I should also structure what I say based on some of those questions. To look back on how this whole thing started. In 2017-18 camp, that is our center, we did an interesting, we brought together people from different parts of the country. There were two judges retired, both who were deeply connected with mediation. One was the director of the Bangalore Mediation Center. The other also was director of the Delhi Mediation Center. So in-depth understanding of mediation. We brought in institutions like FCDRI, and we had about 10 or 12 mediators from different parts of the country, two academic institutions. One was National Law School of India and University, and the other was a professor from the Loyola College in Los Angeles, who has immense understanding of the legislation on mediation. We brought all these people together to conceptualize legislation for mediation in India. And we worked on it for about 2 years, till about 2018, and came out with a draft. Subsequently, well, you know how the country came together. We had a group from Delhi who worked with it. Then we had a group from Hyderabad. Then the Supreme Court constituted a committee. And finally, we are where we are. It is in the parliament, pending before the parliament. So this was an interesting experiment that we did in 2017-18. And therefore, it has a very strong, this legislation has a strong foundation. A lot of minds who understood mediation came together. Now, why did we do this experiment at camp? We did this. As I mentioned earlier, I was a mediator from 2006-07. After being a lawyer for about 20-25 years, there were a few others also. All of us were really smitten by this process. The magic of mediation, your next topic. And we also felt that it should go beyond the court annex programs. There's much more to mediation. At that time, all of us were at the court program, and that's when we were first exposed to this whole concept. And we had people, in 2 years, I resolved more cases than I did in my entire lifetime as a lawyer, actually resolving cases. So we really felt that there is so much potential. And if you start private mediation, then we are able to cater to people more, in a more, what do I say, make it more exciting, more interesting, bring in different subjects, more research and development on the topic. So all this was possible, and that's how we started camp in 2015. And we were really excited. The few cases that came in, we just saw how we could do this so differently. We could cater to our parties in a much more exciting way, because in Code and X program, we have our limitations. So this was exciting. We started, and then we realized that the awareness of mediation is very low. We actually, after setting up this beautiful office and everything, we actually had people coming in with their yoga mats. When is your next meditation program? We didn't realize that, the awareness was so low. We realized so many complexities to the practice of mediation. The parties, the litigants, through many years of the adversarial mindset, it was difficult to shift that mindset. When parties are in conflict, it's difficult to tell them about understanding and different perspectives of collaborating. That was a challenge. The lawyers were concerned about diminishing revenue. To market mediation was so difficult. We had to convince 4 antagonistic set of people, because you have to bring both sets of people in conflict. You have to bring in both lawyers. So there are 4. As a lawyer, we just brought in 1. That was our practice. That's what we were familiar with. Now we have to bring in 4 different people, all of whom are antagonistic. So this was really a challenge. So we actually brought in some of the great business minds. I remember we brought in Krishna Kumar, founder of Mindtree, and he listened to us and said, this is a change of mindset. You need to have a critical mass of satisfied users. That's the only way mediation will work. US, it took 30 years to really change the mindsets. Now mediation is really entrenched, but it took them 30 years. Do we have that luxury of 30 years? We don't. We have so many cases pending. We have a backlog. So that's how we began to think of this experiment that we did at camp in 2017-18. Let's see how we can do this. Not knowing where we are going, we just took it on, and I'm so grateful to each one of them that they gave so much time. We all sat together, and I think it took about 1.5 years to come out with something. And then, of course, thanks to so many people who then worked with it, and today it is where it is. I'm not saying that we have the best piece, but we still, only time will tell. But again, I think that exercise that we did was very timely, because in 2019, the Singapore Convention came. With that, a mediated, international cross-border mediated settlement agreement could get enforceability. I also want to tell you that in India, mediation was not standing shoulder to shoulder with arbitration or litigation. It was considered as another touchy-feely something which some people are engaged in, it didn't have the credibility. But with Singapore Convention, there was a little more, I mean, people did sit up and say, okay, what can mediation do? After the New York Convention, which was 1958-59, this was such a crucial instrument that gave credibility to arbitration, the New York Convention. So in the same way, Singapore Convention could give much credibility to mediation. It certainly makes cross-border disputes much easier. Language barriers, cultural barriers, the legal systems that are so different. Situs is not important. So all these factors could make international dispute resolution much easier. It could increase trade and commerce. So even the government was giving it importance. And that's how we had the Supreme Court forming this committee, and actually many of the members who were with us were also part of that committee, and including the professor from the Loyola College in Los Angeles. And that was in 2020, and I still remember, you know, we were from different parts of the country, the Supreme Court committee, and for the first time I learned to use Zoom. We didn't even know how to connect, and then we all said, okay, let's do the Zoom. And it was my grandson, my 10-year-old grandson, who really taught me how to work on Zoom. And I still, you know, Sri Ram often says, if not for Akash, what would we have done? So Akash, each time I got into a mess, I'd scream, Akash, please come and help me. And then we worked on the draft at that time. But anyway, so we have that legislation now, and the legislation has tried to encompass as much as possible. We always need to keep in mind the fact that mediation is so different. It's so nuanced. It's not a set of rules and commands like in arbitration and litigation that we have to set up. Mediation is about understanding perspectives, creating value, empathy. I mean, you know, all those factors which are beyond the rules and commands. So how do you make a legislation for that? It's not easy. And we all, I mean, how to create a dialogue, how to bring about mutual consent, how to ensure the confidentiality to the extent that mediation requires. So these party participation, we all really worked, and we're continuing to work to see how best we can do it. The best situation, a utopian situation, is when there's no legislation for mediation. That's a utopian situation. Human skills. These are all human skills. I remember I was speaking to a very eminent mediator in the US. I had, you know, gone, the High Court had sent me to the US on a study tour. It was in 2008. And so it was fascinating to see what was happening. And before I left, I called up a very eminent mediator there. And I said, okay, I'm going back to India. What is the message that I take back? And he said, mediation is about connecting to the human being. it's not something that you can capture in a legislation. It's not something that you can really capture fully in a training. It's a kind of training. These are all factors that we as a group, many of us have constantly discussed. And how do there are different approaches to mediation. The evaluative, the facilitative. I remember Justice Sinha, when he was one of the early champions for mediation in our country, judge of the Supreme Court, Justice Sinha. And he would always say, we want facilitative mediation in India. This is the Leonard Riskin's grid. Facilitative, evaluative. I sometimes wondered, did he really, what was driving him when he said we want facilitative mediation? Was he thinking of the backlog of cases, how to clear the docket? Was he thinking of social reform, political? I believe Justice Sinha's requirement was that when we do mediation, it should not be only backlog of cases. We should think of transformation. We should think of connecting to the human being. We should think of peace and harmony in the society. So there are these different approaches to mediation. Now, who can be a mediator? Should there be, it depends what the parties want. Some parties want lawyers, legally trained. Some want lay people. Some want psychologists. Some want technical experts. And the legislation has to keep all this in mind. Just 2 days back at camp, we had a graduation ceremony of people who've been trained in mediation. And Justice Ravindra Bhatt of the Supreme Court, he was awarding the certificates. And there's one thing that I really like that he said. We should always remember, disputes did not start in the courts. It started at home, or in the businesses, or in the community. So we need community mediators. We need people who can understand the home situation. We need to go even beyond conflict as we see it in the courts. So we need different kinds of mediators. So these are all factors that we did look at. And what is a template for the training? That's another aspect that is it only, how do you do an opening statement? How do you do joint sessions, private sessions? Or do you train, or do you kind of, help these finer skills of connecting to human beings? Well, it's all yet to be seen how we achieve it, but we have tried, and I can say from my experience of mediation, Indians take to it. And why I say it is that I've always seen, once parties come in for me and they understand what it can do, they're very reluctant to leave. Somehow they want to resolve it at mediation. But you have to bring them in. And that's why there are thoughts of pre-litigation, mandatory mediation. How it comes out is yet to be seen. But an experience of mediation possibly will help in creating that critical mass that I was talking about, a gentle push may help. Like today, matrimonial mediations in most court annex programs, if you look at it, it's primarily matrimonial mediation. And that is happening because legislation has already provided for conciliation. The family, the legislation applicable to matrimonial disputes have already provided for conciliation. And the judges are using mediation instead of conciliation. And once the parties come in, there is a very high percentage of settlement. So in a similar fashion, we are hoping that our commercial courts and other areas where there would be a gentle push for pre-litigation mediation may be a good way to create the critical mass of satisfied users. It all depends on the kind of mediators, the capacity for mediators, for skilled mediators that we have, who will provide that satisfaction with the process. The legislation has looked at institutional mediation, pre-litigation mediation, for court annexed, for community. It's even looking at how our clauses can provide for a mediation agreement. Very often, and our contracts, when it comes to the dispute resolution, we have the midnight clause where it's a cut and paste and they are not looking at it. But now we are hoping there'll be more and more of a push towards having mediation as a part of, an integral part of the dispute resolution clause. Because when lawyers draft the contract, they are so particular about everything, but they don't realize that each contract is a landmine of disputes. So you can never envisage, because essentially a contract is human beings are involved. And when human beings are involved, you can never predict. And unfortunately, we don't provide for dispute resolution by the very same human beings. Instead of that, it's only arbitration or litigation. Hopefully, with this legislation, more and more contracts will provide for mediation as an integral part of the dispute resolution clause. So we have also thought about Mediation Council of India. The legislation is looking at that. And we hope, if implemented well, these would, if it's by people, the Mediation Council of India is occupied by people who have an understanding of mediation, who understand the nuances of mediation, then there is a good possibility that we will achieve what we seek to achieve. So these are broadly my thoughts on the legislation.
But from the perspective of that discussion that you had and what you brought together, were you looking at the structure as it exists in relation to legislation in India? Were you looking at that? What is right about it? What is wrong about it? What is ugly about it? That aspect of it. And also what was happening at the global level, because like I said, we had a model law which was out there. Of course, international commercial disputes is what UNCITRAL looks at, but that model law was not supposed to cover only that. It was a domestic legislation which could look at mediation. So we had a structure available. So did you look at that and say, this is, because it's very, very different from what was put out there. And of course, like I say, so many people sat together and put that together. And Delcy was there in one of the sessions and she had worked on that. So all that was available to us. And then we moved into this very complicated structure. I'm saying we haven't moved into it, but just a thought came in, and I'm hoping that thought somewhere gets changed. But if looking at the structure that was there, the model law, how did you look at that and think that this was not the way to go?
The hundreds of hours that has been spent on this legislation. Yes, it will not be exactly what I want or A wants or B wants. Because as you said, there are so many people, there are so many stakeholders involved. And everybody's thoughts and needs has to come in. So I believe that everybody has tried. Everybody has tried. What comes out will not be perfect, but it might be better than otherwise.
No, but how I'm looking at it, I'm just my question is basically on that. Normally, if you are looking at legislation, normally you would look at current legislation. So I am saying we have the best law in mediation, which is called conciliation as part of the Arbitration Conciliation Act. That one structure is available to us. Then the other structure being, like I said, the model law being put together by people who would have debated each of the issues that were required. And there were many more than what could have been part of this committee that was there. Because committee itself, of course, I won't get into the structure of the committee. That part I might get into, that's just a separate thing. But I'm just saying from that perspective that you have a structure, and for so many 25 years you have a structure. Has it worked, not worked? What are the issues there? Is it more about the awareness? And we have a good structure available. And the model law, I'm saying why we need to discuss that UNCITRAL model law is because a lot of thought has gone into putting it together as to how mediation should be looked at from a global perspective. And from a global perspective, it's a very good thing that has been put out, which I keep saying about the Singapore Convention also, that you can be sitting anywhere in the world and you get into a mediation, a settlement agreement, enforceable in any country which has ratified it. All those issues of arbitration, like the CITES and all that, gone. So if we had that, and then we said, no, let's not look at all this. Let's create all this about jurisdiction, where you have which court has the jurisdiction for this, and all that we tried to be put into this legislation. X bill, we'll still say X bill. We've put in hodgepodge everything from here and there, and going against the whole concept of, like, we put in community mediation. Government will put out the names of people. Please leave us alone. Leave people alone everywhere. You don't have to get in registration. You must go and register these things. I mean, the whole concept of putting things which mediation should have and should, and I've today is totally removed from. We are bringing all those things. Pre-litigation also I will discuss with you, but that terminology I have an issue, which I'll discuss that with you. But on this aspect, please, some thoughts on that, because you've had these discussions.
See, as I told you earlier, Vikram, there are different approaches. Is it possible to build all this in? Yes, the model law, the Singapore Convention is for international mediation, is for commercial mediation. So all the stakeholders have to be convinced that there is this, and there's something beyond that. But should domestic mediation be exactly like what the international model is, or should be different? So it has been looked at. I can tell you that these are all considered, and we are still struggling to convince everybody. Each one's views have to be taken. And we can only do our best beyond that. I do agree, registration. Well, we've all worked hard to make it as best as possible. And remember, legislation is legislation. It is for the government finally to decide how they want it.
But Laila, something on conciliation as we have it today, and of course other legislation also you can talk about. What are the other legislation we have in relation to mediation in the country? Little bit on that, because there's a little history that we have of conciliation being mentioned in the Industrial Disputes Act and all that. Do you want to give us a broad overview of mediation in India in terms of legislation, but specifically conciliation as it exists? Because I I keep saying this, that
Vikram, yeah, we all use conciliation. Let me tell you, even now, because we don't have legislation, when we have a mediation and the parties want enforceability, then we convert it into a conciliator settlement agreement. And it has worked well. I agree it's worked quite well, because we don't follow any of the processes that has been suggested under the Conciliation Act. We follow the mediation process and then convert it into a conciliator settlement agreement. But again, I go back to the fact, Vikram, we need a critical mass of satisfied users. If we are going to do the backdoor entry of conciliation, there is a legislation, Arbitration Conciliation Act has provided how a conciliation is done. That's not exactly how most mediations are done. So we want, I'm not saying we want, I think it will be beneficial to have a legislation which is giving credibility to this process of self-determination, of dialogue, of as far as possible, facilitative, evaluated when it has to be evaluated. I'm not saying one is bad or one is good, but different structures have to come under the umbrella. Conciliation was doing, it helps, it definitely helped. But will it create a critical mass? I'm not sure. Will this mediation legislation create a critical mass? It's very dependent on the kind of mediators we will finally have. And of course, there are some aspects there which I would say maybe I'm also not very comfortable with. But finally, a legislation is made by the government. And we have to respect that.
No, I mean, the thing is that every legislation will and should be challenged. I mean, it's not that we have to take what the government says.
Exactly.
I mean, definitely not, because
Yeah.
then otherwise we don't progress. Otherwise we will be
so
stuck with.
We have that. We have the opportunity after it comes out, if something really is not from our perspective constitutional or violates fundamental concepts, we can challenge it.
Yeah, look, I have to, because in my posts also I put out the background, because there is this, I still say that it is confusion being created about something which normally lawyers are expected to look at the background of a legislation to tell us what it is about, and I mean we expect them to do that. And here the background of conciliation is that we adopted the UNCITRAL conciliation rules 1980. And at that point of time, UNCITRAL was using the word conciliation.
But now UNCITRAL also has changed.
No, that's what I'm showing you. I'm just showing you exactly what UNCITRAL said, because background never has to be there, because otherwise, because it is mediation. And why is it mediation has been put out? So what UNCITRAL said in their model law that they put out, of course, mediation means a process whether referred to the expression mediation, conciliation, and expression. They've clarified here.
Thing.
No, what they clarified in the model law in the footnote, this is what they did. And this was very relevant, because this is something which should be told to people. We don't have a law on mediation. And there's clarified it so nicely that we use the term conciliation with the understanding that the terms conciliation and mediation were interchangeable. In preparing this model law, the commission decided to use the term mediation instead, in an effort to adapt to the actual and practical use of the terms, and with the expectation that this change will facilitate the promotion and heighten the visibility of the model law. This is important. This change in terminology does not have any substantive or conceptual implications. We take something that a particular body puts out, we adopt that into our legislation. And then after we've adopted it, the word suddenly becomes a word which is not mediation, it's something else. We have to look at it, Laila, what you have to do is we have to look at it as to putting out to people. If you have to, this is 1980. I mean, imagine 45 years back, how you had to put across to people that this is a process done in this way. We are not, I mean, if first of all, the understanding of mediation itself, I mean, the fact is some countries, like you said, I mean, would look at it as a facilitative process only. So if in their legislation, they will create that. Brazil has done that. Mediation is facilitative, conciliation is evaluative. They have made legislation on those two. So if a country makes legislation on those two aspects, that, okay, this is how it's going to be done, and wherever they have to use that, that's a different thing. But we have of legislation picked up from somewhere where the explanation of the word. So I'm just trying to say that they're creating this kind of potato thing. Instead, the usage of it should have been promoted and should be promoted. Instead of this potato, I was, I think yesterday only I was talking to someone that, look, someone is hungry and wants mashed potatoes. And what are people discussing? This is potato. I only use potato. And the other says, no, this is potato. I only use potato. And the hungry people sitting there for the mashed potatoes. Let's create mashed potatoes and move on. And the debate has got stuck in something where I say that what we need is available to us. Something needs to be tweaked in it. We always start from there. That, okay, what tweaking has to happen? But to say that this is not even mediation, it goes into a totally different angle.
I don't think that the legislation will do that, because the definition of mediator, I think mediation is fairly broad.
No, I tell you, Malala, I tell you the difference that we have done in this X bill, hopefully X bill. I'll show you the difference, and that difference makes all the difference, because I mean, this is something which I just to take you to the definition in the Singapore Convention or the model law, wherever you look at. This is the definition here.
So
This
look at the
this part,
definition.
yeah, I'll take you there also. This aspect got removed from it, which
Well,
is the most important part of the entire aspect of mediation to be explained to people.
see, I want you to know that this is not final.
It should not be
There are
final.
people working at it. It's
We'll
only a
fight it.
bill. It's not an act.
No,
There
I
are
look.
people working at it.
I wanted people to come in. I asked Hero also that why don't you come in, but of course he has a time limit.
Who's that?
Hero,
Who's that?
Hero, who Hero,
Yeah,
Hero.
yeah.
So because the problem with me is that I have scheduled these things.
No,
I don't put
so
out these schedules in advance. I
as
should
I
put them.
told,
No, I should actually put these schedules at least 2 months in advance, and I always end up doing it really close to the thing.
but,
But
as I told you earlier, Vikram, we have, so many of us have spent hundreds and hundreds of hours to keep it on the track that we want to keep it. Again, it's been mediation while drafting the mediation. There's a lot of mediation that's gone into it. So it will not be exactly, but I can assure you, we are still trying our best.
yeah, because I think maybe also, look, I have an issue with a committee being made by the Chief Justice of India on mediation, because they have nothing to do with mediation.
It is the Department of Law and Justice.
No, I'm talking about the committee that the Chief Justice had made, where this whole concept of drafting a mediation bill came up. The point is that, first of all, Chief Justice of India has nothing to do with
No,
mediation.
that was only to make recommendations.
Yeah, the recommended part of it. I'm saying what happened was that a pressure comes on the government because the Chief Justice of India starts a certain move towards drafting a legislation and put some people together towards that action. I think that was, I felt, was not the right direction to give to it, because it has nothing to do with the court system. And I keep saying I should not keep repeating this, because obviously we go into that time factor on, we need your inputs, which are more important. But the fact that the court system by itself is inefficient. Their inefficiencies are being brought into the aspect of how that mediation process goes on and why people settle. And if they are settling because the inefficient institution will take too long or will cost them too much, that for me is not mediation, because mediation is self-determination. And here it is not self-determination, because its factor is someone else being inefficient. And look at the situation, Laila. An inefficient institution cannot do its work, sends out matters to mediation, because obviously the backlog is too much. And in that mediation, the people, the mediator, and maybe even if there are lawyers involved in it, will also tell the people that you will, if you don't settle here, you will go into that inefficient institution and you might take 14 years. So I look at the situation, an inefficient institution.
Vikram, I want to, clarify that what the Supreme Court only constituted a committee to make recommendations, and all were mediators, I think all. There was Sriram, JP, Mr. Chandiok, then Sadhana, all mediators, myself, all, and expert committee to eminent Hero. Hero was there. And it was Joel Lee. So all mediators, when the recommendations were given to the government, it is only recommendations. These recommendations were only all made by people who have a lot of experience in mediation. Then, of course, it is in the hands of the government. There's not much we can do, but even there, a lot of people are working with the government. Government has been inviting people to look at it, people who have the credibility, who have the understanding to work with it. That's also going on.
I mean, that way, the good thing that happened was at least it went to the standing committee. So at least these discussions happened on a broader way. A
Yes,
lot of inputs came in, at least in their report, at least they put out all those recommendations that came into
yes,
that. So at least
yeah.
we've now started a process. I'm still saying this has started a process on discussing something, because obviously there are lots of people. I don't know. Look, I don't know about these like things like Fiki and all. Did they come into, have they given the recommendations to them? I don't know whether, because
They
user
were
has the
all
user been,
invited. Yes, yes.
yeah, because
Fiki
users have, we
and
need the users to come in also to give their recommendation.
absolutely, as I mentioned, the Supreme Court committee recommendations were given to the government. The government invited, and many bodies gave their views. All of us, we gave our views on whatever the government has suggested, and we are continuing to give our views. I mean, as when it's called. So there is a lot of inputs that have gone in. Now, what comes out, we don't know. We really don't know. That is in
Yeah,
the hands of the government.
yeah, because look, again, for me, when I look at the framework we put here and the way mediation should happen, is of course you choose whom you want, because it all comes from trust, nothing else. The trust that people have in the person who's going to be their mediator. That's the starting point for mediation. Otherwise, it doesn't go through. And then to limit that, luckily, of course, the institutional court, there you're trying to control that aspect, who's going to be there. Luckily, the others still was not touched, because the thing is that there's so much happening in the world. That's why we're even having this discussion. There's so much happening in different countries, but, and let's see what's happening in that country also has to be looked at. I'm not saying that the population, we should change things. For me, still has to be simple. But what is happening in a 3 million population country, we look at a 1.4 billion people thing, and you have to create that. I mean, you need mediators, you need the whole process to be brought together. Then you look at a legislation, because what are you legislating? You have zero on something, the institutional part of it. Numbers are so, I mean, I will not even, let's not even call them numbers, nothing. I mean, compared to what we are in terms of disputes out there, and the in litigation, what pending matters, what are going into courts, institutions, are nothing happening there. But we are looking at legislating something where there is already zero. And if we have, it has to progress, development will have to happen organically first, to start with, at least to see whether people are even using the process when you have a legislation available to you. Let's put that out, because I've never seen, I was told to send someone else also, that the Supreme Court has not strongly ever in their judgments, I haven't seen any, maybe you'll tell me, never said that, look, you have conciliation available to you, and a settlement agreement in that is as good as a court decree. You should use this process and support it. Instead, what they did in the AFCON's judgment, which Aman had also pointed out, at one point they said that once you go out into conciliation, if you are not satisfied with it, you can come back to us. And then on somewhere else, I did not read it, he was pointing out that somewhere else they said you have to come back to us. If conciliation is a standalone process and that settlement agreement is as good as a court decree, why tell people to come back to you? You're already sending out a message that is not a complete process by itself. So first of all, what
No,
look,
but Vikram, conciliation You cannot force anybody to
No,
come
no,
to the.
here, no. See, in what they've said is in the CPC, because mediation and conciliation both are mentioned, and conciliation is under the Arbitration and Conciliation Act. So you have chosen to go into that, which is outside the court system. If you want to do mediation, there's a framework available in the court system. You can use that framework, but you can go out, which means you choose your conciliator, and at the end of that, that settlement agreement is obviously covered under the conciliation legislation, and that settlement agreement is as good as a consent award, which is as good as a court decree. Why tell people to come back to the court in that judgment? They should have
No,
said that that's as good as a court decree. There is no issue. Now you don't have to come back to us. I'm saying strong messages. I'm not saying if how they were assisted in that particular case. I'm not getting into that. I'm saying even now, today also they have an opportunity, because the court is not there to make legislation. It's not their duty. Let's keep their job to their job. I know they want to do everything for themselves, but let's let them keep their job to themselves. They had nothing to do with legislation. What they have to do is current legislation that they have, they're supposed to interpret that. When it comes to the interpretation of the current legislation itself, on one hand they're saying promote mediation, because for them, of course, it's self-interest of theirs to promote it, and put out to people that you have very good legislation to use. What the government does on legislation, how it looks at it, is their prerogative. It's nothing to do with the court system. That will happen. That function will keep happening. But to pressurize the government to keep putting things out to that anyway is not required. But forget all that. Today, I'm saying even today, forget what's happened in the past. Today, the Supreme Court has the opportunity. Every day, they have the opportunity to send out a strong message. And I have been saying, let the Chief Justice of India go out on media and fold his hands, say we haven't been able to deliver justice, but because justice delayed is justice denied. Why don't you use this legislation? Please do it, and it'll help you, because you'll be able to settle things in an amicable manner, which is a very good thing. We are not here to promote litigation. It's not a good thing. You should not have to come to us, whatever way that he communicates it. But the fact is, together with that, he must put out that this legislation is a complete thing by itself, and it that has a force of law. It's, I mean, somewhere now I think that message has not been communicated to people, because they do not feel anything can be a court decree until there's a stamp on it of the court. No, it's been put, a framework is there. It is a legislation by itself, and I think it was much before its time. Today, you're talking about MEDAP, and a legislation in 1996 gave you MEDAP, because it specifically says mediation or conciliation under Section 30. We're far ahead of our time. We still don't want to look at something which we have with us and think that something will come, then mediation will go forward. Something else we need. We have to take from somewhere else. What we have, this is, I think, maybe is this an Indian issue, that we think that somewhere else something good is happening. We have the best today in terms of legislation for mediation.
Vikram, if you notice, it is very few countries where mediation is really taken off. America, after 30 years. It took a long time for them, but they really worked at it. They had their, as you said, they had their champion judges. Some of the, I remember one judge who would say in the court, you deal, otherwise it's an ordeal. You choose whether you want a deal or an ordeal. But it's been a long time. Well, we've also been, I think, although CPC was amended 2002, by the time we started, it was 2005, 6, and now the court annex programs are in place, but private mediation is still struggling. And you're right, we need our judges to push for mediation. And only when mediators get opportunities can we have good mediators. So how do we do that? Mindsets have to change. We have to have a group of satisfied users. Today, after 30 years, many people in the US opt for mediation. So voluntary mediation works. But in Italy, it has been mandatory mediation. And I'm not saying that's a perfect answer, but they've been able to achieve fairly good results in some areas. There are many flaws, but they've been able to achieve something. As for us, our legislation, hopefully when it comes out, will clear up many of the doubts. That's our hope. We're all working at it, and let's pray that when it
No,
comes, it will be good.
actually, Leila, what you just said actually goes against the promotion of mediation itself, because what we are sending, the message that we are sending out to people, when these are people who can be users of mediation, we are sending out the message, we are waiting for some legislation and then things will happen, and they were going to think, okay, right now we don't have anything, let's wait. But other thing that you said, that very few countries it has taken off, and you said US. I'm saying, how is it taken off there? It is still not a process that people use as the first instance. It takes off when people use it at the first instance, not because you've gone into court. And because, of course, the other aspect of it, of course, Paula is here, maybe she'll talk about it, but the fact that lawyers control the whole process, and it is, of course, still connected to the court system. I mean, is that really progress? I mean, is it taken off? It's the culture of mediation has to happen with people in people's mind. And again, I tell you why this whole thing happens, because the person who goes into that mediation because of the inefficient judiciary is settling not for good reasons, is settling because otherwise the costs of that litigation and the time factor is huge on the other side. So, and that's not mediation that we want to promote, that there's a gun on your head and you settle because otherwise the option is that. The option, that should not be the reason.
Vikram, I want to tell you that in camp, we have people who are coming in for litigation before going to court. They come in for mediation. And we have amazing things happening. Yep. Currently, I'm doing 2 mediation. One was a family business dispute. When they came in, they were not looking at each other. Today, it's amazing how they're all working with each other to continue the business. I'm doing another shareholder dispute where they just were so volatile, but now they've reached a stage where they can communicate, and I need to intervene when they get volatile. So amazing things are happening.
Exactly. That's what we need to promote, and these are the messages that we have to send out.
And I believe the more mediations we have, we need to move into, so private mediation is working. I can tell you, we're doing private mediation. If you ask me, can I do more? Of course, we can do many more mediations. We need courts to refer cases. We need the mindsets to change. We need a critical mass of satisfied users. All this has to happen. And I believe, I'm an eternal optimist. I believe with time, all this will happen.
But one thing I didn't, of course, we don't have too much time, but a little bit. What I was wanting you to even put your thoughts out on, what looking at mediation from a global perspective, on a global pool of mediators, and the fact that today we are, I mean, online, people have become comfortable in mediating online. In that kind of a scenario, in terms of legislation, even domestic, I mean, let's look at domestic legislation, because the way I'm putting it across is that you should be able to choose whom you want anywhere in the world. You think you trust Paula sitting in the US, you trust her. I am no one to tell you that you can't trust her. That's a colonizer's mindset, that you can't trust so and so. You have to trust the people I tell you to trust. So we have to get over that. So you should be able to choose anyone.
Vikram, only in court annexed mediation, we hope there will be an allotment, and we are hoping that it will be a mindful allotment. In private mediation at camp, parties choose their mediator. I totally agree with you that if the parties want Paula, sorry Paula, but we will now. If they want Paula, and Paula is on our panel, which we hope she will one day, then why not?
No, I was saying something. I was not getting into. No, I'm not getting into specific. What I was trying to say was that this is the framework that I was looking at from domestic and global, that you should be able to take whom you want, sit wherever you want to, get into an agreement wherever in the world you want to, and it should be enforceable in any country, wherever the subject matter may be, without any kind of process to be followed, because that's what Singapore Convention has given us, that this is possible on a global level. Why not in a domestic level? So, but Leila has, I think she's I had a little bit of a technical issue, but well, I think we had a technical issue. But anyway, what we'll do is we'll wrap this one up because Paula's time is about to start. So if there's any last, you just have to just unmute yourself and just any concluding kind of statement, please.
So my concluding, Paula, nice meeting you. I can see that you're from USA and hopefully we'll meet. To conclude, I'm hoping that, I just want to say that a lot of people have worked a lot, immensely on the legislation for mediation in India. And I hope we'll be able to have a legislation that promotes the fundamental concepts of mediation, that creates a change in mindset, where we can have a menu of options for dispute resolution and the kind of mediation and the mediator that parties seek to have. That's my hope.
Well, when are we going to move from parties to participants? When is that going to happen? I'll tell Paula about that after we start her session. So thank you very much, Ella. Always a pleasure speaking to you.
Yes, but I'd like to meet Paula for a minute before
please. No, you can talk to. I'll just stop